Now we get it. And it's really important. Photography gives those people, those names that you have, it gives them life. And that's what we're all about in photography. Now, you're sitting right now in your chair, probably not realizing that you are moving right now at 1,040 miles per hour. That is the rotation of the earth. Luckily enough, everything around you is moving at the same speed, so it looks like we're standing still, but in all reality, we are moving at 1,040 miles per hour. When I took my shower this morning, I looked at my shampoo bottle, and I wonder what would happen if that wasn't moving at the same speed. That would be utterly chaos on our world. This is very important because this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the timeline that we live on. There's a timeline that we live on. We're either between birth or the next life. We're all going in the same direction, by the way. Just like the earth is rotating from east to west, we're all on a timeline as human beings. This is important because when we talk about photography, this is going to be critical. So remember that part as we go into our presentation. Now, the other thing I want to talk about a little bit is, this is a family history event, right? I want to bring my brothers to the family history event. So here are my brothers. On the left-hand side, I have my brother Geert, and my brother Kurt is on the right-hand side. These are two brothers that I adore, absolutely adore. And we lived on a dairy. Now, not a dairy that you would have in America where you have a row of cows and you milk them and you make a little dairy. No, in Denmark, they have what's called co-op dairies. A co-op dairy is a dairy that the farmers own, and they bring the milk in and they hire a man, which was my dad, to make the cheese, ice cream, and milk. So it was ready to go to the grocery store. Now, because of this picture here, you can see that I was fed on all this milk, ice cream, and cheese. And so luckily enough, I thinned out over the years, but that's what they fed me when I was little. Now, let me tell you something, and that is, my father was a fairly good businessman, and he made this beautiful cheese, and my mother packaged them, literally packaged them so they could go to the grocery store. But she ran out of time. There was just too much demand for the cheese. So my father wanted to find a packing machine. Now, if you live in Europe, you know that Switzerland is a good place for those kind of machines. The Swiss are ahead when it comes to machinery back then. And so my father got an invitation to a Swiss company to come down and make this, look at this packing machine that he could use to package the cheese. So they sent an invitation. They said, "We'd like to see you and your wife." And he said, "Hold on a second," my father said. "I will not go down to Switzerland unless you take our entire family." So lo and behold, we went to Switzerland. And this here is actually a picture, a photograph from Austria, just across the border, where we were going to, as a trip, we went on a salt mine in Salzburg. So this is the Salzburg salt mine, and we wore black. I think they were white nowadays, but back then they wore black. We sat on these little trains, and we went into the things. I don't remember a thing. This has all been told to me. But I'm showing this photograph because a tragedy happened exactly a year after that photo was taken. This was taken in 1970. In 1971, and you can see my brothers right there. You have Geert on the right, you have Kurt on the left, and my father in between. Kurt has kind of a little bit of a funny shoulder because he had broken his collarbone 2 weeks before. That almost canceled the trip. But that little blonde kid that's standing right in front of that mother, his mother, is me, and I was 4 years old. The next summer, my mother fell ill. She was folding laundry in an upstairs bathroom. And as she was folding laundry, I was 5 years old, and I was home with my mother. She says, "Jens, I'm not feeling well." And she went and laid down on the bed next to the bathroom. My little 5-year-old feet ran out into the dairy to find my father. I found him, and I said, "Mom is not feeling well." He came into the house. And the last thing I remember is standing on that porch of that little home, seeing the ambulance leave with my mom and dad. And my mother never came back. Photography is all I have of my mom. The only way I can reconstruct the memories, who she was, what she looked like, maybe even remember some of the ways she felt, is through photographs. So don't ever underestimate a photograph. You all have lost loved ones, and I guarantee you that by looking at those photographs, you can recall some of those great memories that you had with those that have just passed into the next life. Now, talking about stories, mankind as a whole has always wanted to tell a story. You go to the pyramids in Egypt, and you will see them drawing things into their pyramids. You go down to southern Utah, look at the Fremont Indians. What do? They carve stuff into their red rock. And in Denmark, and this is where I'm from, this is about 22 miles from my house. The Vikings, which were a pagan society at that time, converted to Christianity. And this rock is called Jellingestaten. It was erected in the memory of Gorm the Old, who was the first king of Denmark in 810, and his wife, Tyra Dannebod. And guess who erected it? It was Harald Bluetooth. Harald Bluetooth was the son, and in that inscription into the rock, it told the story about their civilization. So, for all we can remember history, we as humans have wanted to tell a story. Now, something changed in 1826. A gentleman named Joseph Nicephore Nips invented the camera. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of other people that were working on this thing. The camera itself was a black box. And inside in front of the black box, there was a small hole. And for centuries, people had known that if you had a dark room with a small opening of light, that an image would appear from outside, if it was a bright day, would appear on the opposite wall upside down. That is the principle of a camera. It is called the camera obscura, which in Latin means dark room. And that's where camera gets its name from. Now, that is going to be important when we talk about how a camera operates. So that's how he got the first photograph. The photograph is of some rooftops in France, and the exposure took 8 hours. Had he exposed it for 9 hours, guess what he would have had? He would have had a very overexposed image. Had he exposed it for 7 hours, it would have been underexposed. But he found a chemical that was light sensitive, and many people at that same time was looking for something they could create a photograph with. Now, we all know that cameras became mainstream in early 20th century. And that is through an inventor named Eastman Kodak with the Brownie picture. Remember the Brownie cameras? They were all little 3-inch by 2-inch. They're black and white, and there's millions of them all over the place. In basement and attics of America, they're everywhere. Eastman Kodak was a brilliant businessman. When I entered photography in 1989, everything was 35 millimeter film. You may remember 35 millimeter film. That's what we used back in 1989. Now, what's cool about it is that over the last 30 years I've been in business, I started out with film, and today it is almost completely digital. The whole world is digital right now when it comes to photography and picture making, photo making. So in 30 years, it has gone from analog to almost completely digital, which is kind of funny. When I teach a class at the store, I have a 30-year-old or late 20 or 30-year-old, and I say to them, do you remember film? And they go, film is something my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather used. It's not something we use today. And they've never taken a roll of film. They've never taken pictures with a roll of film. Next to that 29, 30-year-old person, I have an older gentleman sitting next to her, and he is about late 60s, early 70s, and he's fiddling with his camera and says, this is complicated. And that's because it's digital. And so it's not, what's interesting about this is the film, the analog world and the digital world is the exact same world. The only thing that has changed is the medium in which we record that photograph. And let's talk about that, because we're going to talk about, I told you we're going to talk about cameras today. I want you right now to go inside a dark room. So it has 4 walls, it's completely black, painted black on all 4 sides, and that room has a window. Are you with me so far? In front of that window, there's a shade. Those things that turn, opens and closes like a shutter. Okay, shutter shades. Now what you have is, you have a camera. On the back side of the wall, opposite the window, you have something that records that image. And that's exactly what we have today. The camera, all cameras in the world have a shutter. It has an aperture or an opening, and it has some way to record that image. I don't care if you have a smartphone with you, an Android or an iPhone, it uses the same principle of capturing a photograph. 1826 was when this was invented. So it's the same today. So inside the shutter, just imagine the shutter opening and closing. It's letting light in, right, into the dark room. That is called the duration of light. Oops. Here we go. There we go. It's duration of light. And the duration of light is how long is that shutter open for? And it's measured in time, in seconds, sometimes minutes. In Joseph Nicephor's times, it was measured in hours. The other thing that we have is, how large is that window into your dark room? Is it large or is it small? So that lets in the amount of light, how much light's coming in to that room. The next thing we have is the sensor itself. Do you remember that Joseph Nicephor Nips took 8 hours? His chemicals was not very sensitive to light, so it took a long time to get a good exposure. And so that's called sensitivity to light. Now what you have in a camera, you have duration of light measured in time, amount of light measured in, we call it f-stops, and then we have the sensitivity to light measured in ISO. And that's ultimately how we get a photograph. Now the common denominator being light. Now in photography, and I'm teaching you a little bit of a lesson here, in photography, each of those 3 different things does things to your photograph. And now we're trying to create a masterpiece. That's why we're here. We've always wanted to talk about, in Roots Tech, about the past. I think we need to discuss the future. And this is how we create a beautiful masterpiece that we can take to our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren of who we were on earth as we lived here. So, shutter. We're going to talk about the shutter first. The shutter speed affects the motion in your photographs. You either get a sharp picture or a blurry picture. And if you notice up on the screen that 1/125th of a second is red. The reason why it's red is because you take 1 second, you divide it into 125 parts, and you're only using one of those parts for your photograph. Now, why that's important is because if you want a clear picture, you have to handhold your camera at 1/125th of a second or faster. Otherwise, you're going to get blurry pictures on a stationary subject. If your subject is moving, such as a basketball player or whatever, your shutter speed has to be higher. This same scale that you see right there is corresponding in your individual cameras. All your cameras have that same scale.